Okay, joining me now is Dr. Wilfred Riley. He is a professor at Kentucky State University. He teaches political science and intelligence, and he's the author of the book Hate Crime Hoax: How the Left is Selling a Fake Race War. Great to have you, Dr. Riley. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
All right, let's start with this. Let's start with the number, because we see a lot of left-wing activists that tout the numbers of hate crimes in America versus how many are actually prosecuted. So they say, well, there's X number of hate crimes in America that proves that America's this horrible, racist hellhole, but how many are actually prosecuted?
Well, that's a good question. So first of all, there aren't that many hate crimes in the USA in the first place. We have 332 million people, according to the latest census. I'd say more like 360 million if you include tourists, illegal residents, so on. And there are about 7,000 hate crimes a year that are formally reported as felonies or as AB misdemeanors, and that are classified in that fashion by the FBI. So there aren't all that many. But you're absolutely right that even that number does not reflect an actual number of convictions or even an actual number of prosecutions. In California, the biggest state with the most reliable data, last year on record, which as I recall was 2017, there were fully 931 reported hate crimes. But of those, only about 220 were actually referred to the prosecution and resulted in the filing of criminal charges of any kind, and less than 155 ended in convictions. So the conviction rate in hate crime matters is very low, unusually low for a variety of reasons. That's about 5 to 6%.
So we're not as awful of a country as some of the left-wing activists say we are. You're on a college campus. We do see a lot of these hoaxes evolve on college campuses where there's an almost instant sense of celebrity for the victim, right? The person who claims to be the victim almost assuredly will attract media. There'll be candlelight vigils, activist groups will show up, and then, of course, the police start their investigation.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that was most remarkable to me when I started researching and writing Hate Crime Hoax was the sheer number of these cases that took place on a college or university or senior high school campus. It was roughly 40% of all of the incidents, whereas around 1% of Americans are currently enrolled in that higher education process. And that's the same not only in my data set, but if you look at, for example, the resource www.fakehatecrimes.org, more than a third of the cases on the first 10 pages of that site, the prominent cases, took place in a university setting. And thinking as logical people, we can't help but imagine that the culture of victimization to some extent, ethnic studies, youth chapters of activist organizations, radical faculty that exists on many, many college campuses has something to do with that. If you were to report that you had been the target of an ethnic attack in the serious business sector, you would be quietly advised to take a day off perhaps and go to the police. On a college campus, you might well get a parade through campus. You might, without joking about that, but it happens fairly frequently, you might get the kind of response that we saw at the University of Missouri, Oberlin, Michigan, many similar institutions.
Well, one of the amazing things about this is there's an immediate rush to proclaim someone's guilt, to ensure that you can't question the victim. That's victim shaming. But when these hoax stories fall apart, there's always somebody who says, well, don't blame the person that lied. Let's have a conversation about racism or homophobia. Well, hold on a second. Hold on. We can do that. But this person lied, proclaimed that somebody else had committed a crime against them, and wasted police and sometimes even FBI resources. That has to be dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, filing a false police report is a crime, and I'd be perfectly happy to see the charge for false report amplified in cases of false report of, for example, a hate crime or a sexual assault, just as a typical minor crime like assault is seriously amplified if it is motivated by hate. So yes, that is a criminal act. One thing that I will say here, although many of your viewers probably already know this, there's nothing dishonorable, racist, etc. at all about wanting to wait for the conclusion of a criminal justice process. In fact, that's what we're supposed to do. So when you see something, whether that's a police shooting of a minority man or the exact reverse, an officer down, you see a hate crime incident, there's nothing at all wrong with saying, I want to see what happens in criminal court with a professional judge and a sitting jury. I want to see if there's a conviction here. And at the end of that process, I think that's when you can truly say, yes, we have seen guilt or perhaps innocence.
So let's talk about the high-profile cases like Jussie Smollett. I mean, the mainstream media goes all in without question, and there's never any ramifications for the media. Now, I'm not talking about censorship, and I'm not talking about regulating media any further, but how come the media just continues to not learn its lesson? We had an incident, I'm broadcasting from Washington, D.C., just outside Washington, D.C. A young black girl claimed that 3 white male classmates held her down, called her the N-word, cut her dreadlocks off, and then after the police sprung into action, it turned out she cut her own hair off. But the media just moved on to the next story. The media never seems to take the advice that you're giving right there. Let's follow the facts. Let's get updated by law enforcement. Let's not put some of the craziest activists on television, but they do it every single time.
Well, I think that there are a lot of things there. I think, first of all, the popularity, the proliferation of alternative media sources, whether that's an entire network like yours, whether it's publishers like mine, Regnery, that present conservative or on the other side of the fence, genuinely radical, Jacobin perspectives, whether that's just Facebook and Twitter. I do think now we have the resources in society to not only hold the conventional media perhaps a bit more liable for what they do, but also to bypass the conventional media. But if we're just going to focus on the conventional media, yes, there clearly are biases. I would say that one of those is for sensationalism or the quick story. So obviously, media outlets are going to try to get out a narrative about a flamboyant front page hate crime as quickly as they can. And that's not just confined to hate crime. The media publishes stories frequently about entire categories of accident or violence, plane crashes, animal attacks that almost never happen. So there's a bias towards sensationalism, headlines, if it bleeds, it leads. There's also, and there's no doubt about this, a bias toward the left side of the political aisle in American politics. And I see this fairly frequently in my research. To give just one small scale example, I recently have begun writing about interracial crime. And there's fairly little interracial crime in the first place. 85% of murders of whites are committed by other Caucasians. 93% of murders of African Americans committed by other African Americans. But when interracial crime does occur, it's very consistently, year by year, 70 to 80% minority on white. There are more white people. They have more money in terms of something like targeting for a robbery. This isn't especially surprising, but media coverage of it is. According to my best data, the media coverage focuses about 90% on the atypical 20% or so of white on black cases. And that's how you see something spun. So there are things that are both sensational and that feed into a certain narrative. Ethnic conflict is one of those, and that's almost always going to be covered. And you're right, it's not covered exceptionally well. I think we could agree on that.